The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Before we get started, we want to do a sound check. The way we can tell that you can hear us is if you would please raise your hand using the hand icon. Okay, I've got several hands. Thank you. So if you could now just lower your hand so we don't confuse that with you wanting to provide comment later in the meeting, that would be great. Okay, so welcome and thank you for attending the State Electrical and Plumbing Board's stakeholder meeting via webinar today. Today's date is April 14th, 2021, and it is 9:01 a.m. Before we get started, we would like to introduce the staff members from the Division of Professions and Occupations that are present. My name is Elena Kemp, and I am a regulatory coordinator with the division. Also attending, we have Joyce Young, she's the program director, and Darcy Magnuson, who is the regulatory analyst. In compliance with the governor's orders regarding COVID-19, the division has transitioned to a platform that is 100% virtual, and we appreciate your flexibility. As many of you have been to DORA stakeholder meetings before, we would like to reiterate the importance of your comments today. DORA makes decisions every day that may affect your life and your business, so your input is vital in the rulemaking process. Throughout this process, our goal is to create regulations that clarify and explain legislation, ensure minimum competency to enter and continue practice, and provide only what is absolutely necessary for consumer protection without creating unnecessary barriers to the marketplace. Your input will be part of the information that goes to the boards as they consider adopting new rules to implement Colorado Senate Bill 2120 concerning new requirements for registered apprentices. As this stakeholder meeting is being held solely via webinar, please raise your hand using the hand icon if you would like to speak, and we will unmute your line so you'll be heard by everyone. Or you can type your comment into the question section and we will read it aloud. Before we start taking comments, I want to ask that everyone that is planning on providing comments, please state your name and the name of the organization that you represent, if any. Feel free to provide either general comments on the new proposed rules or specific comments on the actual language. Limit your comments to 3 to 5 minutes or less, and try to keep redundancy to a minimum. If you're using audio through your computer, please remember to put any phones on vibrate or turn them off. And whether or not you're using computer or audio through your computer or through your phone, please try to keep all background noises to a minimum. And just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on each board's website by the close of business tomorrow. So currently we just have the Senate bill showing on the screen. And Joyce, if you'd like to jump in, we can switch to the rules as well before we start taking comments.
Great. So Joyce, Program Director for the State Electrical Board and the State Plumbing Board. And we had a stakeholder meeting on February 22nd where the stakeholders discussed potential revisions to adopt rules related to the requirements of Senate Bill 2120 regarding exemptions to the requirement for 6+ year apprentices to take the examination upon reaching that 6-year apprenticeship time. So they've been registered for 6 years. They're required to take a journeyman exam for electrical, residential journeyman exam for plumbing. And this is just a note up front. This is not a different exam. It is not a streamline to licensure. The apprentices would still need to meet the requirements for licensure, which is covered within the statute, within the bill language in the statute. So within the statute, it allows for the board to promulgate rule that would, if there is a reasonable, legitimate educational or professional circumstance that would be considered for waiving the requirements for that apprentice to meet the requirements of this statute. So that would basically allow them to maintain their apprenticeship registration and not have to take the examinations required of apprentices in this bill. So with the discussions from our February 22nd meeting, the electrical board was able to review the comments and the testimony provided at the last stakeholder meeting and agreed with the direction the stakeholders wanted to go with the rules. And with that information, the draft of those rules were created. And let me just note that on the first page of the draft that you see is for electrical, and the second page is for plumbing, pretty much just for numbering purposes. They are essentially the same language, just with the specific board identifying information changed within those rules. I also want to emphasize that this is scratch. This is just a draft. So what we want to do today is to try and get this to a somewhat final review for the board to consider the language within the draft rules. So as we go through comments, please do provide any edits that you think need to be made or considerations that need to be made or documented here within the draft rules provided. So if I can just quickly summarize what was expressed during the stakeholder meetings was the allowance for deployed service members to be able to count that time as exempt from the requirement for the examination as apprentices. So the 1.3 apprentice registration and record keeping is where we have placed this exemption. And the exemption on this first page notes that exemption for apprentice required to exam. So that's the header for it. And then the notation is that the apprentice is seeking exemption to the requirements of the section must meet and follow the criteria established in accordance with that section of the statute, which requires circumstances that justify the exemption. So if an apprentice is looking for an exemption, this is where they would go to find out if they qualify for an exemption and how to submit that information. Also, let me note that if there is specific information regarding military that you are aware of when it comes to the allowances for reporting this, please also do provide us that specific information regarding like acceptable evidence of deployment. Also, some of these were estimations of times in which they would need to provide those materials. So please do comment on what seems reasonable and realistic. Again, this is just scratch language for us to get started. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and have our facilitators open up the discussion for those who want to make comment.
Thank you, Joyce. All right, it looks like we do have several hands raised. So let me go down the list. Okay, we have a hand raised by Mr. Ryan Guides. I'm going to unmute your line now.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to have my hand up. That's my fault.
No worries. We have a hand raised by a Mr. Bruce Krenek. I'm going to unmute your line now. Looks like you're self-muted. There we go.
I must have made the same mistake. I thought my hand was down.
Okay.
So,
All right. I have a hand raised. Oh, okay. Miss Natalie Fox, I'm going to unmute your line.
So there seems to be a weird thing happening with the hand raising because I'm the third here that's not actually raising my hand. It's weird.
Gotcha. Sorry about that. Okay, it looks like we have a pretty quiet crowd then. I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
All right, this is Joyce Young again. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Elena.
So it looks like we do have someone in the question pane saying her hand is raised. Ms. Alyssa Soares, I am going to unmute your line.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I didn't have my hand raised, but for whatever reason that didn't show up for you. Just a question on whether this, on whether military deployment is the only exemption that came through and only thing that was acceptable. And I asked this because I've sent, conferred with my team, and we're in electrical and we're in solar installation, who were asking for an exemption for those who hold an active residential wireman license in the state of Colorado, as they are licensed, and how our organization works there are times that folks who are primarily in our residential department and who don't want to leave that department do work on commercial projects with our commercial team. So they still want to gain those hours, but having them, not be apprentices, they're working residential and having to re-register every time they work on a commercial project, it just, obviously it incurs fees, it's a big headache. So yeah, first question I guess is this the only exemption that is going to be acceptable moving forward? Is there still a period of reviewing exemptions, or kind of wondering within that context of RWs specifically.
This is Joyce. I'm wondering, there's been a member of the stakeholder team that has specific information regarding the discussions during legislation, and I'm wondering if there's anybody who wants to comment on this question. My understanding of this decision was that if a residential wireman is doing commercial work, they should be moving toward a journeyman's license, or they should be moving toward getting that professional license, and that using them off and on is not necessarily the direction that the exemptions wanted to consider, is residential wiremen just sporadically working in commercial. Rather, they would have a concerted effort toward obtaining their commercial, their journeyman license, rather than a business need of a contractor. And yes, for verification, this is the only exemption that was considered and sussed out through the last stakeholder meeting. Also agreed by the electrical board's review of those that feedback regarding deployment being the only exemption, and that residential wiremen, residential plumbers should be able to meet that 6+ year requirement if they were working toward their journeyman license, which would justify them doing commercial work.
Okay. It looks like we have another hand raised by a Mr. Jeremy Ross. I'm going to unmute your line. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, this is Jeremy Ross, representing the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And we were involved with the legislative process, and I think you explained it well. That the intent was for, if people are working on commercial projects to advance to that classification. So I think you explained it well.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. There were times where you kind of in and out, but I do believe most of what you said is that the consensus was they are supposed to be moving toward the journeyman license. And it looks like we have a comment in the question section by a Miss Felicia Taylor. I have mic issues, so I will just try to type my question. It may have already been covered or be covered later on. My question is for grandfathering. When would this testing stipulation take effect? Would it be for future or would it be backdated?
This is Joyce, the program director. So the examination requirements for electricians started in January of this year, and for plumbers, it starts in June of this year. The examination cycle runs parallel with the licensure renewal. So for electricians, an apprentice has to take the examination once within that 3-year cycle, as required by statutes. We would hope that they would try and become licensed and be encouraged to take it again within that period if they failed. But with regard to the statutory requirement, they would be required to take that examination once each 3-year cycle to run concurrent with the license renewal period. And for plumbing, it is the 2-year renewal cycle.
All right, thank you.
And then just for clarification as well, the exemption would not be eligible for any apprentice candidate until they have taken the examination once and failed the examination within 2 renewal cycles. So that is in the future, it will run more concurrent with the 3-year renewal cycle, but you would have it approximately 6 years for electrical and 4 years for plumbing to take that examination twice and fail it before you would be able to apply for the exemption.
Looks like we have a couple more comments. One comment from Mr. Rory Burman. Sorry.
Roy Burman.
Thank you. He says, we were also invited in this legislation, and your assessment was spot on regarding RW and JW classification. A comment from Ms. Soares again. Follow-up for logistics on electrical. If someone passes their JW exam but will not have the field hours until the next code cycle, does that past exam still count towards their eventual licensure, or do they need to retake the test within the same code cycle as they apply for their license?
Let me check on that information. If anybody has that information on hand, let me know.
Okay. And Joyce, did you want to kind of try to provide an answer now, or did you want me to
Yeah,
give
we'll
Ms.
get
Barr
back.
information and get back?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. We can do that. Don't see any other hands raised currently. All right, I guess we'll give it a few more minutes. And just as a reminder, so these are the rules that are being developed. So if anyone has any specific language in the rules, I would like to notate it so that the board can see it, and we can do that on the screen so that it's transparent for everyone. Or if there's any additional language you want to add, or something you want to change, or something that you want the board to also consider, this would be your time to provide that input.
And I do have an answer for Ms. Soares. The requirement for the examination is it needs to be based on the code, the current code that is in effect at the time the application is submitted to the board. So if they take it and pass it in year 1, but don't end up applying until year 4, they would likely need to retake that examination to qualify for licensure.
Okay, we have another comment from Mr. Clint Hosteletter. I think the earlier question is whether or not an apprentice that was already registered before January 2021 would need to do the testing, or would they be grandfathered into the old rules?
Yeah, there is no grandfathering.
And we have a hand raised by Mr. Ryan Mercer. I'm going to unmute your line. Looks like you're self-muted.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Am I on? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello?
Is my audio working? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, looks like we might be having just a little bit of technical difficulties with Mr. Mercer, so we will circle back.
Elena,
Yes.
did I unmute for my answer about the examination requirement?
I
I don't know if I was talking to myself or not.
think you may have, if you want to
Okay.
cover
Yeah,
that.
I'll just restate it. So, according to the board rule, the examination, the successful completion of comparable written state electrical examination based on the current edition of the NEC that is in effect at the time the application is submitted to the board. So if someone passed the examination, journeyman examination in year 1, but didn't end up having those qualifications until they took and passed the exam in year 1, but didn't have the qualifications until year 5, they would need to retake the current NEC examination in order to be current with the codes when they become licensed.
Okay, we have another comment by Mr. Shane Dodson. I'm an independent, self-employed master electrician. I just want to say that these rules are great for fostering a more professional and expert-driven workforce. Thank you. Another comment from Mr. Daniel Hendricks. Hooray, well said. Expert-driven workforce indeed. And Mr. Mercer, I do see that you were having issues. He also sent a comment in the question section. If you'd like to try that again, I will go ahead and unmute your line so you can speak. It's showing that you're self-muted.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect, we can hear you.
All right, good deal. I can hear you. So I'm an educator, and so we have lots of apprentices that go through our school to meet the requirements to get their journeymans, and typically for us, those are our apprentices that have that will do that within a 4-year time period, right? So I'm a little bit confused and just want to make sure that I'm clear and I'm not giving out bad information. This new legislation applies to, say, someone who isn't going to do it within the 4 years. They've been around for a while, and if they've been around since after January 1 of 2011, since the requirements for their 288 hours of education started, they would need to meet that requirement, and they would need to meet their field hours. So I'm confused because I've also been told that typically you must meet all of the requirements in the rules, which are 8,000 hours and your 288 hours of education before you would apply to take your test. So is this an exception where this is only for apprentices that have been registered as an apprentice for over six years or more, and they would be allowed to go take their test before meeting those requirements, as long as it was within that particular code term, that the 3-year period?
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Mercer. When an apprentice goes to sign up on the exam vendor's website, they'll be given the option of selecting just the journeyman exam or the notation that they are an apprentice taking the examination to meet the statutory requirements.
Gotcha.
So there is
Okay.
it's not a different exam, it's just a different designation on the reason for taking the examination.
And then they would need to then still meet the requirements for licensure.
Absolutely. There's no waiving of the requirements for licensure within this statutory requirement.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it very much.
It looks like we have a hand raised by Mr. Bill Bickett. I'm going to unmute your line. Looks like you're self-muted.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So following up on Mr. Mercer, we posed that question to Dora, and they said the order for testing has not changed and it relates to the qualification for licensure. Applicants must attest when scheduling their examination that they meet the qualifications for licensure before they take an examination. False attestation when scheduling an exam could result in a denial of the license. My next question is, what is the tracking methodology for this program and what is the enforcement? Is this going to be put on the individual apprentices or on the controlling contractor?
We do have tracking mechanisms in place with the contractor, but we do, we're not, because of the length of time in which the apprentices can take this examination, and this is the 6-year apprentice. The statement that you read definitely qualifies for those seeking licensure through the normal process, where they have gained their 4 years of experience in their education, and they're just going through the regular process, and they're not necessarily taking it as a requirement of this statute. What you read from Dora is absolutely correct for those individuals outside of this bill and statutory requirement. So I will make sure that we push that education up to make sure that it's covered across board here at Dora on that piece. And as I mentioned, the reason we established the different examination type, if you will, with our examination vendor is so we would be able to, at least on the onset, be able to see those individuals that were taking the examination based on the exam that they signed up for. But it is anticipated that we will be, reviewing the length of time in which apprentices have been registered and comparing those against that 6+ year requirement in the future after the 3 and 2 year cycles are up respectively for the boards, and follow up with enforcement with those individuals. And it could lead, the statute, I believe, references the potential for suspension of the apprentice registration.
My concern is there are many apprentices out there with 6+ years that have not obtained their licensure through examination. And there's a lot of them. If you look at the DORA registry of those apprentices, it is a major portion of the apprentices out there. It just seems like a daunting task that I just want to make sure if we're being part of this and as stakeholders, that if we have an apprentice who is not testing and their license is revoked after that first 3-year cycle because they didn't test, how is the employer notified?
Our rules require that we notify whatever contractor the apprentice is registered with of any adverse reaction. So you would be included on that, any adverse reaction against an apprentice.
Super. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, I don't show any other comments or hands raised. Oh, we've got a hand raised by Mr. Bickett again. Let me unmute your line.
I apologize. Clicked the wrong button.
Oh, no worries.
And this is Joyce again. I just really want to encourage everyone to take a really good look at the language within this rule, and do consider providing us any red line as the rule outlines the exemption for the military deployment period, noting that the apprentice needs to meet the examination attempt requirements, as I had mentioned earlier, and that a request would include supporting evidence and documentation for consideration. And noted in that section B that you can see on your screen, that lowercase b, it notes that that information needs to be submitted to the board at least 15 days prior to deployment. It seemed reasonable, but also, again, looking for feedback about that time frame. And then the next paragraph there is acceptable evidence would be something that clearly states the date and the length of deployment, and be issued by the military in the form of a copy of the deployment order, a report or letter from a senior officer, and or other military evidence of deployment. Again, that would need to be clearly stated on something issued by the military. And then noting as well in that paragraph 2 under that section B is that special consideration of timely submission may be given with evidence of short-term notice deployment, since in some cases deployment can be short-term. There can be short-term notice of that deployment. That would be under consideration as well. And also, as we discussed, going into that next paragraph 2, the exemption will be applied. How the exemption will be applied is that when calculating the years of apprentice registration that requires an examination per the statute, so we'll calculate the years, and for the actual time the apprentice is deployed and actively registered as an apprentice with the board, and so that times of deployment that may disadvantage the apprentice may not be counted. And those are mays versus shalls, so it does provide reasonable information and consideration, but does not tie the board's hands where reasonable exemption should not be given. And so that's the long and short of it. Just again seeking any feedback on where we may have missed the mark in the drafting, or where the time frame, especially that 15 days prior to deployment notice, all those types of things are really important for your feedback.
We have a hand raised by Mr. Ryan, guys. It looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this back to us. I was just, let me rephrase all of that. The last discussion was much more spirited, I would say. There was a lot of input from contractors, plumbing and electrical, both sides of that. I dropped in late to that one, and I'm wondering, is there a recording of that meeting or minutes of that meeting to go back over those things? Because it seems the last half hour or so of that meeting really addressed a lot of this exemption to the deployed, but it didn't really address many of the concerns that were brought up earlier. How can we go back to review that former meeting to bring up our questions going forward?
A copy of the webinar recording is actually posted on both of the board's web pages.
Okay.
Underneath the public notices tab. So if you pull up the electrical board or the plumbing board's webpage, and they'll see a tab on the bottom, or it's in the middle of the page, shall I say, and it just says, you click on that, and it'll have a drop-down list of all the recent rulemaking activity, and you'll see the date and the webinar recording, and you click on that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Guys, there was a lot of discussion around the reasons for exemption, and I think through the conversation, this was the factor that stood as a reasonable exemption to the statute. And it also was reviewed by the board as well, the electrical board. It's gone before the electrical board, and the electrical board did listen to and have access to the materials of the last stakeholder meeting, and agreed with the exemption that was sussed out during our conversation. And again, this is what was discussed as the legitimate circumstances for providing an exemption. Thank you.
Okay. I don't show any other hands raised. I don't know if you want to give it another minute just in case participants are typing another comment. It's currently 9:43. We can wait just a few minutes to see if anybody else wants to provide feedback before we proceed with the meeting. And Joyce, just to make good use of our time while we're here, you wanted to mention some things that's going on with the boards. This might
Absolutely.
be a good time.
Great. So as the program director of multiple boards, I just did want to introduce to this group that we are doing some board member recruiting right now. We do have some electrical board appointments that we are needing to fill within the next couple of weeks. We're looking for applications. You can email me your interest at joyce.young@state.co.us, or you can go to our website, just email it onto the the board's email address and it will get to me. But we're currently right now looking for an electrical utilities representative. This representative needs to be of a private, municipal, or cooperative electrical utilities rendering electrical services to the ultimate public. We're looking for a public member as well, and we're also looking for a general contractor. So we have a somewhat smaller board, so it's really important that we look to try and get these positions filled. That general contractor needs to be actively engaged in the building industry. Our electrical board meetings are every other month, and they are on the odd numbered months. The meetings are typically 5 to 6 hours in length. We're looking for a good fit would be representation from northern or western Colorado. We do try and promote diversity on the board, so any type of diversified classifications we can recruit onto the board is highly desirable to make sure that we have a robust and actively participatory board. So please do let me know if you are interested or know others that would be interested, again, for an electrical utilities representative, a public member, and a general contractor member on the board. The other opening I have is for the state plumbing board. We are looking for a master plumber who resides and works outside of the Denver area. Again, they meet on every other month like the electrical board, but they meet in the odd numbered months. And representation would be preferred from northern or western Colorado for the master plumber. I do also have other openings that I'll run through quickly, but those are my really main focus, especially for this focused audience. Please do consider that. We do have an opening on the Architects, Engineers, and Surveyors Board, of which I'm a program director for an architect and a professional engineer. And the professional engineer we're looking for is, we'll consider any discipline, but we're trying to focus on a geotechnical engineer. And the Landscape Architect Board, who I'm also the program director for, we are looking for a licensed landscape architect with 3 years of experience outside of the metro area. So that is my plea for great new board members to consider applying with the governor's office and contacting me to get the specifics about that service. I kind of have a one sheet prepared for those that are interested. If you're interested or know someone, I'm happy to send that along to you so you can forward it on to anyone that might be interested. Thank you, Elena. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Okay, so I don't show any other hands raised or comments in the question section, so I think it's okay to proceed. And just so that everyone knows, if you find yourself having you want to provide input or feedback to the board later, that is totally acceptable. All you have to do is send your written comments to Dora_DPO_rulemaking@state.co.us, and we'll gather up all the written comments, all the stakeholder webinars, all stakeholder feedback gets sent to the board prior to the permanent rulemaking hearing. So this is definitely not the last chance that you'll be able to provide that input. So I do want to say thank you for participating in today's meeting. All written comments and stakeholder feedback will be provided to the board for review and consideration prior to the permanent rulemaking hearings. The permanent rulemaking hearing for electrical is scheduled for May 26, 2021, and plumbing's permanent rulemaking hearing is scheduled for June 30th, 2021. So this concludes the stakeholder meeting. We are going to end the webinar now.